Okay, so food systems, huh?
Yeah.
You always manage to dig up some fascinating stuff for these deep dives. Academic papers, reports, even infographics this time. I gotta say, it is kind of a lot, even for me.
Oh, it's a big topic. Everyone's got a stake in it, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I have to admit, I feel a little like, I don't know, we're about to go spelunking into the depths of our refrigerators or something.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe not quite spelunking, but yeah, there are definitely some hidden depths to uncover. It's like we see the food on our plates, right? But we don't always think about all the steps and systems and impacts that went into getting it there.
Right. Like we all know food comes from farms, but then it gets a little fuzzy after that. And speaking of fuzzy, let's talk about this whole donut economics thing. I feel like anyone who's even glanced at the term sustainable food systems has stumbled across this. But help me out here. How does it actually apply to what we eat?
So imagine a donut, right? The hole in the middle represents a lack of essential human needs, things like food, water, healthcare. The outer ring, that's like the ecological ceiling it represents, exceeding our planet's limits. Things like climate change, biodiversity loss.
Okay, I'm seeing where you're going with this. So the donut itself, that's the sweet spot.
Exactly. It's the space where we meet everyone's needs within the planet's boundaries. And when it comes to our current food system, well, let's just say we're not exactly in the dough right now.
So where are we? Are we in the hole or have we like eaten our way through the donut completely?
Honestly, it's a bit of both. We're producing more food than ever before, but we're also seeing rising levels of hunger and malnutrition, especially in certain parts of the world. And at the same time, our food system is a major contributor to exceeding those planetary boundaries we talked about.
Yeah, it's like we're stuck in this weird paradox of like feast or famine, both at the same time.
It's a real head scratcher.
Yeah.
And to understand it a bit better, it helps to think about the four capitals framework.
Four capitals. Okay, you're gonna have to break this down for me.
Sure, think of them like the four pillars of a sustainable food system. We've got natural capital, which is all about the planet's resources, the land, water, biodiversity. Then there's human capital, the health, well-being, and knowledge of the people involved in the food system. That includes everyone, from farmers to consumers.
So it's not just about the environment, it's about us too. I like it. What are the other two?
Okay, so next up, we've got social capital. This one's all about fairness, equity, strong communities. Think fair wages for workers, access to healthy food for everyone, no matter where they live or their income level. And finally, we have produced capital, which encompasses all the stuff we create to help produce food infrastructure, technology, all of that.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together. So how's our natural capital doing these days? I've got to say, it's not looking too good from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, not great. Our current food system puts a ton of pressure on natural resources. Deforestation for farmland is a huge issue, especially in places like the Amazon rainforest. And then there's water. We're depleting aquifers faster than they can replenish in many parts of the world, largely due to unsustainable agricultural practices.
It's kind of ironic, right? Like we need water to grow food, but we're using up all the water to grow the
Yeah,
food.
exactly. And we can't forget about climate change. Agriculture is a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. It's a pretty bleak picture when you start to connect the dots.
Bleak is one word for it. All right, let's move on to human capital. What kind of impact is our food system having on us, the eaters? So we were talking about human capital before we got sidetracked by the doom and gloom of natural capital going down the drain. What's the deal with these ultra-processed foods we hear so much about? Are they as bad as everyone says they are?
Well, let's just say they're not exactly winning any awards for nutritional value. They're often loaded with sugar, salt, unhealthy fats, and all sorts of artificial ingredients that our bodies aren't exactly designed to process.
So basically, a recipe for disaster.
Pretty much. We're seeing a direct correlation between the rise of ultra-processed foods and the increase in diet-related diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, even some types of cancer. It's like we're trading short-term convenience for long-term health problems.
And it's not just the food itself, right? It's the way it's marketed, often to low-income communities who might not have as much access to healthier options.
Exactly. There's a real social justice issue here. It's like the people who are already most vulnerable are being targeted by these cheap, convenient, but ultimately unhealthy food options. It creates a vicious cycle.
Okay, so we painted a pretty bleak picture so far. Can we talk about some solutions? What about all these alternative diets we've been hearing about? Is there actually a best diet for the planet and for us?
That's the million-dollar question. There isn't one magic diet that works for everyone. We all have different needs, preferences, cultural backgrounds, and let's be real, budgets.
So no easy answers there. But I'm seeing some common threads in all this research you sent over things like eating less meat, incorporating more plant-based foods, and supporting more sustainable farming practices.
You're definitely on the right track. The ET Lancet Commission report, for example, they came up with this planetary health diet. It's basically a flexitarian approach, mostly plants, with smaller amounts of meat, dairy, and fish.
I've heard of that, yeah. But there's been some pushback, right? Like, isn't that kind of a Western-centric view of what a healthy diet looks like?
Yeah, there are definitely valid critiques. We have to be careful about imposing a one-size-fits-all solution on the entire world. That said, many traditional diets around the world actually share a lot of similarities with these recommendations.
Oh, interesting. So it's not necessarily about reinventing the wheel. It's about going back to our roots and rediscovering those time-tested food traditions.
Exactly, and that's something that WWF highlights in their Planet-Based Diets report. They actually looked at dietary patterns from around the world and found that many traditional diets are inherently more sustainable and healthy than the standard Western diet.
Okay, so we have these alternative diets. Great. But how do we actually bridge the gap between knowing what to eat and actually putting it into practice?
Right, because it's one thing to say eat more veggies. It's another thing entirely to change those deeply ingrained habits and systems that influence what ends up on our plates.
Exactly. It's like I can't just walk into the grocery store and demand they stock locally sourced, sustainably grown everything. Well, maybe I could, but
Uh-huh. You could try. But you're right, individual choices are important, but they can only take us so far. We need systemic change to really shift the needle on these issues. That means policies that incentivize sustainable practices, support for small-scale farmers, and making sure that everyone has access to affordable, healthy food.
so how do we make that happen? Because honestly, it feels like we're up against some pretty powerful forces here. I mean, we're talking about the entire global food system.
It's definitely a tall order. But there are some promising approaches out there. You mentioned true cost accounting earlier. That's a really powerful concept.
Yeah, remind me how that works again.
So right now, the price we pay for food only reflects a fraction of its true cost. It doesn't factor in the environmental damage, the health impacts, the social costs. True cost accounting is about bringing those hidden expenses to light.
So it's like shining a light on all those externalities that are, what, just swept under the rug?
Exactly. And by exposing those costs, we can start to make more informed decisions as individuals, as businesses, as policymakers.
So you're saying if we can actually see the true cost of our food choices, we might be more inclined to make different choices.
Exactly. It's about aligning our economic systems with our values. If we value sustainability, if we value health and equity, those values need to be reflected in the price we pay for food. And that's what true cost accounting aims to do.
So it's about making those hidden costs visible, right? Like pulling back the curtain and seeing the real price tag on our food choices.
Exactly. And once we start to see those costs, we can start to shift incentives. Right now, a lot of our policies and subsidies are actually propping up the very system we're trying to change.
Wait, really? We're subsidizing unsustainable practices.
Big time. Think about it. Billions of dollars are being funneled into industrial agriculture, supporting factory farms, incentivizing monoculture farming, and keeping the prices of unhealthy processed foods artificially low. It's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot, both figuratively and literally, when it comes to our health and the health of the planet.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to process. So what can we do about it? I mean, I know we can all try to make more conscious choices at the grocery store, but it feels like it's going to take more than that to really shift things, right?
Absolutely. It's a multi-pronged approach for sure. Individual actions are important, but we also need policy changes like redirecting those subsidies towards more sustainable practices, investing in regenerative agriculture, and supporting local food systems.
It's like we need to change the rules of the game if we want to see a different outcome.
Exactly. And that's where things like consumer demand come in. Every time we choose to buy sustainably produced food, every time we support a local farmer or a business that's committed to ethical practices, we're sending a message to the market. We're saying, hey, this is what we value, and we're willing to put our money where our mouths are.
It's like voting with our wallets. I like it. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the four capitals to alternative diets to the power of true cost accounting. What's the one thing you hope listeners take away from this deep dive?
You know, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these issues, but I think the most important takeaway is that we're not powerless. Every single one of us has a role to play in creating a more sustainable and just food system. It starts with awareness, with understanding the connections between our food choices and their impact on the planet and on each other.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of this intricate web of food and that our actions have ripple effects.
Exactly. And it's about believing that change is possible. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to happen overnight. But if we work together, we can create a food future that nourishes both people and the planet.
That's a delicious thought. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
Anytime. It's always a pleasure to talk about food systems with someone who's as passionate about it as you are.
And to all our listeners, thanks for tuning in. Remember, your choices matter. And together, we can create a tastier, healthier, and more sustainable future for everyone.